Wireless energy, powered by the ether, existed way before big oil. We all know how dirty the oil companies are, but to think about the things we could have if they never existed.
An oil refining process was invented in 1854 by somebody in Pittsburgh. By 1870, Rockefeller and Henry Flagler established the Standard Oil Company. And so it was like they needed to get a replacement energy source as quickly as possible. And they got it from this mining of resources.
Back in the 1800s, mainstream academia had 18 additional elements on the periodic table of elements, ether being one of those, right? And somewhere along the line, when Albert Einstein came out with his theory of relativity and started doing lectures across the country and the world, that anybody that spoke about ether at that time was completely, like, their reputation was destroyed. They lost their laboratories, they lost their teaching jobs, like what we saw in 2020.
A lot of times they'll leave the breadcrumbs. A lot of times the truth is in plain sight. So with that, Benjamin Franklin sending up the key on the kite, that's essentially you, the average American, sending up their drone with a copper wire and harvesting electricity straight from the ether.
I think that the ancients understood very well that the ether is real and that there's ways of channeling atmospheric energy, earth energy, and I think that they built their buildings with this in mind.
If we had access to free energy, I mean, imagine if you could just walk into the forest anywhere you want and you could just put up a little device and a resonator and you could build yourself a castle and just do it, levitate stones and just create a kingdom. Well, that's not very good for Joe Biden. How's he going to tax you? How's FEMA going to work with you in that situation? And that's why it's so dangerous to them.
That doesn't work when you're introducing an electric system that is dependent upon a power source, a bunch of wires, meters, and your output that you're having to pay for, where you become dependent on a system of scarcity. This old way of doing things was based upon a system of abundance and plenty, because there's no end of the energy that's all around us all the time. There's another way of doing things. We don't have to live in this way of constant crisis because of constant scarcity. We can break through it, and I think that we're on the verge of rediscovering this knowledge at a very curious time where the old system is actually falling apart.
Everyone knew there was an ether. Most buildings were constructed in that manner until they came in and started destroying things and indoctrinating us.
You go through and you start finding these correlations, you start finding how the free energy worked, what the power stations were, how all these places have got these certain buildings and fountains and certain copper top roofings and all the stuff for landing sites, for flying machines, and you start to see that all of this stuff is way too similar all around the world for there have not to been a single culture.
Many times these towers held old world technologies, such as bells, which would send out resonant frequencies into the community beyond. So many photos of bells being rounded up all over Europe. We're living in a time where we're waking up to what we so recently had.
The pipe organ is a healing machine. That's why it was integral to the construction of ancient Gothic cathedrals. The organ was the centerpiece of the church, of the cathedral. Now, around the building, up, down, around, beneath, you had pipes and essentially speakers blasting this music into the cathedral.
They placed these beautiful organs under these stained glass windows, which are treated with lead and specific properties, and these they work like car speakers. They augment the resonance and the sound out into the ether outside, so everyone outside in the community is invigorated, is on a higher state of consciousness, literally being the best they can. And you can see it in the pictures of these people in the day. Everyone is healthy.
Anyone who's been around for a full volume, live, authentic pipe organ performance will tell you your bones rattle, your organs start to respond. Your hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Walk into a well-made stone cathedral. Hear the pipe organ. Sit there and saturate in the healing frequencies yourself. Cathedrals are something beyond just a center for worship. They are healing machines. And the pipe organ of the cathedral is just one tiny little finger of this whole realm that we're talking about.
You've got starports, which I call a gateway topic because the same structure exists all over the earth, have been given to us as fortifications that were built for these different wars, which made them military targets. And so they have an excuse for why it was built in whatever location. And then they have an excuse for why it was destroyed.
So in school, we learn about one fire. We learn about the Chicago Great Fire.
In the case of the Great Chicago Fire, there was a lot of fanfare over Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over the lantern.
The legend is that Mrs. O'Leary's cow in a barn kicked over a lantern and that caused the entire fire. And poor Mrs. O'Leary and her family had their lives ruined because of this.
We only learn about Chicago. And I remember going to summer camp and we're sitting around the campfire and it's one dark night when we were all in bed. Bum, bum, bum. Old Miss O'Leary took a lantern to her shed, and when the cow kicked it over, she turned around and said, "There'll be a hot time in the old town tonight. Fire, fire, fire." And we would yell fire louder and louder with each verse, and we do this like 10 times to where it was echoing back to us across the lake. And now when I think about it, it's like how many kids growing up in America were singing this song about this stupid story. What I realize is that it's like an incantation and it's spellcasting. Where did this song come from? It's a story that they wanted the population to come to embrace and believe as part of the founding mythos of the country and who we are as a people. Well, lo and behold, as an architect with the keen interest in history, I come to find out only within the last few years that there were fires in every major city. And then I come to find out that it's not just wooden shanty town built out of matchsticks. We're looking at city after city after city with photographic evidence showing masonry buildings of the most exquisite type.
Philadelphia, New York, Boston. You come down to Florida, Jacksonville, Miami. Every major city at one point was burned to the ground. Believe it or not, these were stone cities. These were megalithic stone cities, ancient metropolises that were burned down as if they were made from wood. Very quickly. Now we can speculate as to what the source of that destruction was. From above, from below, arson, biblical destruction, you name it. Nonetheless, every major city in America, if not Europe and the entire world, saw a great devastation by a fire.
You'll see pictures of people walking on the sidewalk like no big deal. I mean, that's subjective, but I mean, that's what it looks like. The pictures are strange. The sequence of events that are supposed to have taken place are strange. So, there's just a lot of clues, if you will, that these weren't random events like somebody wants us to believe.
If you look at photos of even the buildings that still exist of the old world, they always give a backstory for why they took them down, but it's just curious why so many towers are missing now. And so Pioneer Square is one of those examples. And this was built in the immediate aftermath of the fire in 1889. Is curious because it appears on a real estate map from before the fire in a fully and intact form.
In order for stone to burn down, it has to reach 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. House fire reaches the temperature of 1,000 degrees. That's half. It's impossible for any stone building to be burning down. The 1800s and earlier fires may have been fake. They try to explain away multiple buildings with fire stories and multiple courthouses built on the same site in just a year with the same architect, and they're just demolishing these buildings.
This is exactly why My fireplace right here is made of brick and stone because it doesn't melt. You got to be an idiot to think that these forest fires are going to be melting brick and stone. Use your head, guys.
As they are busy dismantling it in the 3D reality that we experience, it was part of a program to dismantle the old world and shock us into an acceptance of basically the new world order.
And that's why I wanted to speak to you today about the new world taking shape around us, about the prospects for a new world order now within our reach.
It's the new order, Babylon banging down your door. The war pigs hungry for war. We rally the troops and rest sword, once and for all. It's the new order, Babylon begging for your souls. They coming and they want control. Yeah, they coming. We burn their system to the floor, once and for all. Listen, it's time to wake the fuck up.
So you had what I would call the reset of history according to a very specific narrative. I mean, it didn't change very much. And using the media like they do today to publish it, print it, this is what happened, these are all the details, these are all the people involved, we got it down on record. So again, they're saying, okay, everything was built out of wood, like a Hollywood movie set. Didn't hold up, it caught fire. So we came in and we built all of these beautiful structures to make sure they wouldn't burn down again. And that is told repeatedly.
You look at any major city, they suffered this same fate. And I don't think it's a simple matter of, oh, they were just so stupid. They didn't know. They put candles all over the place and let their cities keep setting on fire. The stone courthouses, the stone banks, into smithereens. Now in Jacksonville, we actually had a fire where there are first-hand accounts of people who were escaping the fire, and once they thought they had escaped to a safe distance, were watching the fire, because that's what people used to do back then. It wasn't much of a fire department. They just said, well, it's burning, just time to take photos and watch. And what they actually did was they were sitting up on a hill watching Jacksonville burn. They said that things on their persons started spontaneously combusting. Pocket watches, buttons, things that were made of certain materials were combusting. This was happening back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Cities would spontaneously combust with no sufficient cause, no suitable explanation. But they're in a covered carriage. What happens? Materials on their body are still spontaneously combusting, out of nowhere, sparking into flames. Now, how could that be the case if this is a local fire spreading to anything that it touches? These people were hundreds of yards away, if not more, from the fire. There weren't embers falling on them that they couldn't see, because like I said, they were already in the cab. So this is just one instance in Florida, and you can go look up your own city, the closest major city to you, and you'll find this same fate.
You look at destruction from World War I, World War II, it looks exactly the same. So these weapons have been around for a long time.
The biggest factor to 9/11 was the erasure of evidence. Erasing the evidence of the wrongdoings of the government, for lack of a better word, insurance fraud, destruction of evidence. Those two typically go hand in hand when we're talking about buildings falling down out of thin air.
Seattle burned down, the downtown. 2 months later, Ellensburg, which was at that time a major city in Central Washington Territory, burned down. 2 months after that, Spokane, which was another major city on the eastern flank of the territory, burned down. And when I discovered that, I just went, hold on a second. Like, there's something else entirely going on in the backstory.
It's like they want to get rid of these beautiful structures. And some are still in use, but the ones that are inconvenient to the narrative, they just weren't gone. And there's also probably a component of the energy grid in all of this as well, because they keep what they can use, they keep what benefits them, and at some point they determine, okay, we don't need that anymore, for whatever the reason.
Part of the story of the fires is that the fire chief wasn't in town at the time. He was away on some conference. And so the command structure was broken. So the mayor at the time in Seattle was the one that was calling shots. And he was making decisions that they should go in and make what they call fire breaks between buildings, meaning actually bringing dynamite into buildings and blowing them up. And that's acknowledged. And that's acknowledged in Boston, the Boston fire, in city after city, what's called a tactic to contain fires. And then they often say, well, look back in retrospect, maybe it wasn't the best idea. Well, what was causing these fires and what was causing this type of damage in the first place needs to be examined. So when you have a broken command structure and somebody else is calling the shots, that's really curious to me, because that's the same thing that happened in Lahaina.
The wildfires that swept through Maui are the deadliest in U.S. history in more than a century. On social media, people are speculating about what could have caused the fires. One trending theory is that the fires started due to an attack from a directed energy weapon. They're weapons like lasers that use energy fired at the speed of light to damage or destroy targets. According to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, many countries, including the U.S., are researching their use.
Yep, they flipped the police chief Pelletier, who was from the Vegas shooting. They made 10 emergency declarations all about Uncle Billy's and all about Banyan Drive and all this stuff. And to believe it or not, the Sunshine Law, where they removed the Sunshine Law or suspended it, it wasn't in these 10 proclamations that they really promoted and really blew up all over the news. It wasn't in any of them. It was in this quiet little Affordable Housing Act on the side. Truly, it does look like only the places they wanted. Safeway didn't get hit. The gas stations didn't get hit. They knew what was going to go where. It's either they did it from the top with the laser energy weapon, like others say, or it came from the bottom. But one thing was crazy is that over 24 hours later, they were still letting the fire burn. The fire was blowing so fast, the wind, it said it moved 1 mile in 10 seconds. Only thing I would think in my head could move 1 mile in 10 seconds. Some kind of boom one time, the whole place.
With the fires from Maui, I mean, I've got in my head, these rows of cars that are just completely burned.
Honestly, none of it looks like a fire. It looks like it's been destroyed with like some weapon or something from an angle.
Just completely destroyed by a direct energy weapon. Just buildings sliced in half. You have melted cars, you have melted everything. I mean, it just completely looks like a war zone.
Send a laser from a directed energy weapon against the community and then step back and say, oh, that was natural, or too bad, so sad. And all those people are left homeless and they don't get any help. And people aren't being allowed to get out of there. When it's happening, they're jumping in the water and poof, and everything looks like, cars are burned out. And people are going, whoa, what's going on here? And they're not getting any answers. And the current administration also has the slogan of Build Back Better, which was the excuse given for these other great fires. Well, everything was wooden. So look what we did. We built it back with this solid brick. I think what we're seeing now was never supposed to happen this quickly. I think all of these things were supposed to happen without us even being aware of it.
I can only think, why else would you want to do that? It gets rid of everything. There's no fingerprints. There's nothing. It's done. There's nobody to talk. They get rid of all the buildings. What stories is there to tell?
His story is what they're going to tell. It's what they did tell us. Distorting a timeline, laced with cover-ups and preventing public awareness of our own cities being destroyed. How powerful are these weapons? And when did they truly originate?
There have been a lot of people that have been talking about the subject of meltology. And my take on that and other things is that's part of it, it's not all of it. And what I believe is that there was a directed energy attack on the Earth's grid system that blew out the grids. And that caused swamps, deserts. It caused land to just shear off and fall into the ocean. And that would have caused melted buildings as well. A really good example on top of my head is a place called Red Rocks State Park in California. It looks melted. And there's other examples as well. So my belief is that there was just this massive surge of energy. So that surge of energy could have been from multiple sources and just went through the grid system and just blew everything out. When they came here, this was a destroyed and ruined landscape. And they even use the word ruins to describe things, but they push things far back in the past, like thousands of years or millions of years. And that was so far back, we don't know anything about that. The Earth was terraformed by a highly advanced civilization. And so things we think of as mountains, like the Rocky Mountains and hills, are actually buildings.
When you look at the city of San Francisco from the early 1870s, and not a soul around, vast emptiness with a fully intact city, and nothing's out of place except that there's no people. And so what it looks like to me is they went into a city that was already there.
Empty. Nobody around. So odd. Wait, wouldn't the Tower of Jewels be visible somewhere on this map? Remember, from the World's Fair in San Francisco? It shouldn't be, because that was 37 years after this photograph was snapped. Oh, yes, of course. It looks like it's already there.
With the World Fairs, it does seem that the purpose of them was to provide us with a new narrative and bring the population to them, just overwhelm them with this fantastical realm that they were now going to internalize and then burn it down in almost like a ritualistic fashion to sear this into the consciousness of the people.
The populating of the Americas was not as authentic, organic as people might have been led to believe. There was a large system of what people have termed orphan trains, incubator baby farms. A lot of these were housed, hubbed in World's Fairs. You had incubator babies at the World's Fairs.
I think part of it was repopulation. I think part of it was early child trafficking. Premature children were in these incubators. You see pictures of these, nurses in their uniforms in a room filled with baby incubators, with people paying admission. With our increased awareness today, we've got things like Planned Parenthood and other things going on. There are companies that mail kids. There's a bit on my business where somebody can place an order for a child based on eye color or whatnot, and they get delivered. That's not good. And I think it's the same idea, that there's this harvesting of humans going on without our knowledge and awareness, and unspeakable things happening to children that got its start very early on because the same families are behind it.
And you would see this mass migration of orphan trains and orphan boats, and you're like, first of all, where are all these fucking orphans coming from? How many orphans were there in the 1800s? Why?
So everybody's learning this thing at this young age, and everybody has to go by these new set of structures and new set of rules. They have to learn this new history that everybody isn't really agreeing with, and then anybody that's not agreeing with, they have to go to the insane asylum. There is the orphan asylums for the children and the insane asylums for the adults. Now all of a sudden, John D. Rockefeller comes out with the Board of Education, and all of the children are sent to a public schooling system to learn their new history. What better way to trick a society than to take their children at a young age and teach them exactly what you want them to know?
If people just realize that if you don't understand the past, you'll repeat it over and over again. And it prevents people from going to progress in the future. And us as a collective species, we have to get to the nitty-gritty of what really happened, what our true potential now is as a collective civilization. Because we can't rely on those people anymore.
How does any of us know? And I would ask my father this all the time. I would say, Dad, how do you know you have a great grandpa? How do you know? None of us know. It's the truth, you know. Those are things, and you know, people can sit there and say, you guys are off your rockers talking about this stuff, but I mean, look who we're accepting the official story from. All I've ever known my whole life is that we don't know how we got here, and we don't know why, we don't know when. If Americans are sitting there one day and say, I don't know how I got here, I don't know why, and I don't know when, well, then you've been reset.
Don't believe what we say. Go out in your own communities and do your own research. There's plenty of buildings that they left for us to examine. Once we can all wake up collectively, then we can come to realize what they have truly done to us.